Hey everybody. So just gonna check my sound here real quick. Okay, I think we're good. So in today's live stream, I'm just gonna do another tutorial on making space pads, but this one's gonna be a little bit more advanced because it's gonna be dealing with setting setting your sync mode in your oscillators, which gives you a whole other dimension to work with. So again, you can create these very spacey pads like this. Very, I'll let that go for a second here. But very, Brian Eno sounding, very Steve Roach sounding, um, pretty Klaus Shulte, just sort of the founders of the space music, ambient style. And a lot of what they use is modular synthesis using various oscillators and the sync mode, like I said, adds a whole other dimension to it and gives you a lot more to play with in creating your sound. So let's get started. Again, I'm going to be in Arturia Pigments here. And we're going to start from scratch. So I'm going to just set this to default. And again, all I'm really running through is just a leveler and a limiter just to get the sound relatively stable, the volume. Okay, so when we're in pigments, we want to again set it to default, and that's going to reset everything, all your oscillators, your LFOs, your envelopes, all of that. And for both engines, we're going to turn them on to analog. Okay. I'm gonna turn off engine one first and just work on turn off engine two and just work on engine one first. And again, we want to set our LFOs at a pretty slow sine wave. Usually just use two. You can set all three if you want. And again, for those of you who might be new here, I always like to for pads like this, I like to set the LFO to free running. And what that means is the LFO is just going to keep running even as you hit notes. If you have it on a different setting in here, it'll re-trigger the LFO every time you hit a note. And you sort of get a jerky sound if you're sort of in the middle of a cycle. So free running to me seems to work the best. Okay. The other thing I want to do is set our amplitude envelope. We'll get that set first. And so you want a pretty long attack time anytime you're working with these pads, a pretty long release time. And you want it to swoop down just so as you play multiple notes, they don't start piling up on each other and creating really muddy mix. And of course, as you tinker with the sound, you'll mess around with this envelope to what works. Excuse me. Okay. So we're starting off with just a simple saw wave, which is the default in Pigments. And yeah, let's just start with the saw wave. We'll go with the saw wave first here. And the first thing you're going to want to do is actually turn down the volume on oscillator 1 and turn up the volume on oscillator 2. We're just going to use oscillator 2 for right now. We'll add in more later. And the reason we want to turn down or take out oscillator 1 is we're going to hook it into sync mode. And for those of you who might not know sync mode, I really don't have a great explanation for it, but I can pretty much show you what it does here. So what it's going to do is it's basically taking oscillator 2 and it's locking it in to whatever oscillator 1 is doing. It's syncing it, right? And so if I just hit down, let me take the filter down here so it's not so screechy. if I just hit oscillator 2 down, and I move up the notes on oscillator 1, you can hear it, right, affecting oscillator 2. Okay, so remember, we're only playing oscillator 2, but movement in oscillator 1 on the pitch is going to affect oscillator 2, because oscillator 2 is basically locked in oscillator 1. And then conversely, if we move the pitch on oscillator 2, you could hear it doesn't really go up in pitch like it normally would, but you can hear the harmonics sort of going up and down. So let me take it off of sync mode. And this is what it, right? So when you put it in sync mode, it doesn't really do that. But it does do this sort of movement on the upper harmonics. Those of you who are audio engineers out there, you can explain to me how exactly that works, but you can hear it in the sound. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to set an LFO on the pitch for oscillator 2. And you can hear it kind of towards the upper end. Sort of doing that pulse wavy effect, right? If we were to move oscillator 1 around, it's going to affect the overall pitch. But here it's more of a subtle, just sort of pulse wave kind of effect. And you can actually see it here in the wave. If we took sync off, it's just affecting the pitch. Okay. Another thing we could do is Pigments allows you to add in some FM modulation, and it's running off of oscillator 3. So I'm going to set oscillator 3 to a sine wave. Add a little FM, and now you're getting a lot more of that sort of pulse width modulation. If I turn up the filter, you can hear it even more. Go down an octave here. Okay, so that's pretty much the trick. And then, of course, you could set oscillator 1 down. Get a lower octave note. And you could do the opposite and set oscillator 2 up, maybe a fifth. You get a much more chorusy kind of effect between the two. Sort of clip it a little there, but we can work with that. And if you don't want it as buzzy and you want it a little bit more spacey, you can always change this to a sine wave. Smooths it out a little. You're still gonna get some upper harmonics there, so it'll be a little buzzy, but that's fine. I'm actually gonna turn this to this phaser filter. I like this filter with paired up with just a regular low pass here. Get a nice little spacey movement here. Okay, we'll mess with that a little bit more in a minute. But before we do that, let's set our second oscillator here. And so we're gonna just do basically the same thing we did with the first engine. So we're going to turn down the volume on oscillator 1. We're going to turn up the volume on oscillator 2. We're going to hit the sync button. Here I'm going to, I think the other one I moved up already. Yeah. So this one maybe I'll move this up an octave. I'm going to move this one up an octave. Okay. Let's just set these to sine waves for right now. I'm going to turn off the FM on here. Turn up the FM. So again, this is oscillator 3, sort of affecting the FM down here. I'm actually going to turn up oscillator 3 as well, get some depth to it. So now we have both engines going. And we want to put some modulation. Oscillator 2. Some modulation on the FM. Now, the more the FM goes up, the buzzier it's gonna get. So it's getting a little bit too buzzy. So I'm gonna take this down a little. So now we're starting to get the sound that we're looking for. So it might be a good time to just go in and let the effects start taking over. So on the first effects bank, I'm actually going to let's put a chorus on. A large reverb. I don't want too much chorus. Turn that down a little. And then of course our old friend, the shimmer. Now with the shimmer, like I've said in other videos, you need to keep that a little under control, because if you just let it sit out there, it starts getting a little grating, a little screechy. And the other thing is it'll default to an octave up. I like to put it at a fifth up, which is 7 semitones. So now we're starting to get our spacey sound. Thanks to our effects here. Now, of course, you could be using other effects, plug-in effects you have in your DAW. But for purposes of this video, I just want to try to keep it a little simple. And the chorus, not too much phase. Okay. A little bit of that shimmer effect. It's kind of low octave, so I'm going to go up an octave here. Get that real spacey sound. Okay, and one last thing over here. Adding some unison on both of the oscillators. Just increase the voices so unison's over here. Gives it a little bit more of a choiry, chorusy effect. And there you pretty much have it. Of course, you could, a lot of times, playing around with the effects will give you a little bit more dimension. So one thing I like to do, we could put a pitch shift delay. Have that go up 7 semitones, and a reverb. Again, set that to cathedral. And then with this bank, which is effects bank B, I'm going to turn it down just a little and just have it sort of modulate in and out. So you could get that phase shift or pitch shift delay coming in and out. Again, so it doesn't get too overbearing. now we're getting a really, really nice planetarium sounding pad. And again, it's just, setting up these few oscillators. And in sync mode, again, it gives you a lot of different character. And you can play around with the different waveforms. And that's going to give you, again, a little bit more different character. But need to bring the filter up to hear it. With any pad, I like to set a little bit of LFO to the overall amp, the overall panning, so that sounds don't just sit there screeching in somebody's ear. They move around a little and give them a little bit of space. Gets rid of any sort of monotony. That real crystal kind of sound coming out of it. Let's try square waves here. A little buzzier, but more of a Blade Runner kind of feel. Really want to do some Blade Runner kind of. You could do some envelope on this pitch. Just a longer envelope here. So again, this pitch envelope is affecting oscillator 1, and then indirectly affecting oscillator 2 due to it being synced up. And so it's more of that sort of pitch decline is kind of more in the background. It's not so much in your face. It's just sort of affecting the harmonics here. So there's a lot of stuff you could do with that. Now, of course, with pigments, it also gives you this utility engine that we've talked about in other videos. So if you're looking to add a little bit of texture, some background sounds, so let's go with some noisy water drops that might fit. There in the background. They're sort of aliasing. So it gives you a little bit of action up on the high end of the spectrum. But of course, like with any sort of ambient space pad, you don't want to draw the listener's attention to anything for too long. You want them to be able to just sit there and chill and sort of get lost in their own thoughts. You don't want to be constantly dragging their attention. So there you have it. Again, I'd recommend play around with the oscillators, with the different octaves. It'll open up different sorts of sounds and character. Try different oscillator or waveform types. Really a lot to play around with, even though it's just a few little things here. Also, don't forget your unison. That's what's giving it that real spacey vibe. That sort of choiry sound. Okay. I think I'm pretty happy with that. So, for those of you playing at home, feel free to leave a comment, send me a link to anything you've created. I'd love to see it. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment. Feel free to subscribe. I'm going to start doing these tutorials somewhat regularly, as long as I've got something to talk about. But if you have any ideas, certainly let me know. Okay, have fun making your music, and see you